Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Rangers Review. Joshua Barry here. No Derek Clark for me this week with Rangers Review Extra. He's away on a well-deserved holiday. But we're going to speak through, as we always do when the season is on, the game of the weekend, looking at some of the big tactical takeaways from that game. This is something we're going to be doing more regularly throughout the season. And if you want early access to that, you can become a YouTube member. These videos will always be made live to YouTube members before they go out on our main YouTube page for free. You can do that for $2.99 a month. You also get access to an ad-lite version of the morning briefing as well as priority comments. What we're going to get into today, effectively a short look at Rangers against Motherwell, some of the things we learned from that game, in particular the performance of Václav Černý, who got an impressive goal, looking at what he did for the 55 minutes he was on the pitch, and also the goal Rangers conceded. There's been a lot of conversation about this one pass being able to play through the Rangers the Rangers midfield to then attack the Rangers defence. Why is that, and what does it mean? We're going to get into all of that over the next 15 minutes or so. First and foremost, here is the trend line for the game. If you don't know what this means, effectively it's just charting the registered shots and the value of those shots, the probability that those shots turn into a goal, so effectively the value of chances throughout the game. It ended 2-1. It probably should have been a little bit more convincing for Rangers. As you can see, Motherwell didn't really create anything until the second half, but it was one of those games, I think, because Rangers weren't able to get a third goal, but equally because their defence doesn't quite look comfortable enough with just a one goal advantage at the moment, that you did go into the final 10 minutes and one long throw, one mistake, and Motherwell would have been back into the game. Rangers created a fair amount of opportunities. It slowed down quite a lot after the break, after Černý came off, when the game's tempo died down. Probably should have scored a third in and around the start of the second half, but they didn't. The highest value chances was Scott Wright and Cyril Dessers the moment after that Václav Černý pass that didn't materialise in a goal that amassed to nearly half of Rangers' expected goals value right throughout the game. Dessers had a good chance in the second half. Dujon Sterling had a good chance from a header. So a few high value chances created by Rangers. I still think obviously some things to be desired in their attacking play, but they created enough, and certainly created more than they had the week before against Hearts, a lot more than that. For a home game, I think it was decent given where their squad is at and how many changes you'd still expect Philippe Clement to make between now and the end of September. So let's look in particular at Václav Černý. I want to look at his performance before we go on to look at what went wrong for the goal that the Rangers did concede and what effectively made the game nervier than probably the balance of play suggested it should have been. I'm going to put up on the screen now the passes that Václav Černý received. Now, as mentioned, he was only on the pitch for 55 minutes. He's clearly not at full sharpness. I think you saw that in midweek away in Lublin. But what you also saw in midweek and here at the weekend at Hampden was that when he is up to full speed, he's a player who's going to have a lot of quality. Now, we've not seen that much of him. It's always important not to get ahead of yourselves when you're trying to look at players. But he certainly looked like he looked like the answer to Rangers' right-wing issues, at least for a season. Obviously, he's only on loan. There's no obligation to buy. The thing that stood out to me about Černý is he made most of his impacts in this game in the centre. If you think of his pass through to Scott Wright for that chance that we just mentioned there, and also his goal. But more often than not, the initial passes he was receiving was out wide. So you can see here that the majority of his passes, rather than in the kind of half space and the narrower positions, was out on the right touchline. There's a few reasons for that. I think he's a player who likes to move inside, having started outside. He's a winger who maybe he wants to get the ball out wide but not stay wide. Quite often you see him get the ball and then make a darting run inside after he'd created the gap in the defence. You saw him interchange positions with James Tavernier quite a lot as well. So this is where he got the ball, and that's important context, I think, when we go on to speak about a few of his interactions in the game. So we're going to look through now at Černý's pass for the first, what should have been the first goal, what was the first big chance of the game. As ever, these are in GIF format, so I'll play it through a couple of times before we break it down slide by slide and look at the moment we're trying to focus on. This was, of course, I think about 10, 11 minutes into the game when Černý spun on the ball in the midfield, played a pass that I don't think anyone else in Hampden really saw. Somehow Rangers failed to score from two really good opportunities. The first thing that stands out from this move is there's often a lot of criticism about one of the Rangers midfielders going into form a back three, but what that can allow them to do if they time it right, and I think timing is a really important part of the conversation that Cherney himself mentioned in this post-match press conference. When you're trying to break through defences, when you're trying to access spaces that are only going to be there for a second. But going to this back three, you can see here Ridvan Yilmaz and wide on the left and James Tavernier's wide on the right. It allows Cherney to move inside because the fullback is holding the width. Conor Barron has dropped kind of momentarily into the back three, into the defence, sorry. Cherney gets the ball, and it was just a moment of quality again that I don't think many players in the Rangers squad at the moment are capable of carrying out. I'm going to speak a little bit about stylistically why Cherney might be more of a suit to Clement's style of play as compared to other players who've played for the Belgian manager last season. But this pass, as everyone will have seen who's watching the game, firstly, being a left footer on the right, it gives you that balance, it gives you the variation next to James Tavernier. Should have created the opening goal because it was so good, created those two opportunities. It was a sign of things to come, though, because Cherney, again, while we've just spoken about him starting wide, he times his interaction to get into the middle in the right moment. That means that when he receives the ball in this situation, he's kind of going against his marker's momentum. He's not really picked up by anyone here, which is really important. It gives him the time to pick out the pass. Should have created the opening goal, but Scott Wright and Cyril Desters weren't able to get it over the line. If we look at the lead up to the first goal, while it was obviously not necessarily about James Tavernier and Václav Cherney, I do think it gave us an interesting insight into how that relationship could work. And again, having that variation, having a right winger ahead of Tavernier who's left-footed, who gives you different angles, it's not something we've seen under Clement so far. And we've kind of referenced this in the morning briefing over the past few days. I think that Clement, if you look at the type of players he inherited a lot of players who maybe aren't at their best in big open spaces, or aren't at their best when they're running in big open spaces, when they've got the kind of autonomy to maybe play in transition a little bit more. So what I mean by that is, if you think of Michael Beale's football this time last year, it was a little bit more about control, I'd say, a lot of positional freedom afforded to players, didn't play with wingers. But someone like Todd Cantwell, who obviously is on his way out of Rangers, I don't think he's at his best when he's given the whole pitch to make up and when he's in positions like Václav Cherney is. What you see with Cherney, someone who's made his name in the Eredivisie and earned that move to the Bundesliga, is someone who's probably a little bit more suited to play in transition football. Verticality is one of these kind of football buzzwords that I'll probably get told off for using on Twitter, but it's a word that Clement actually used at his first press conference. And I think if you look at the way that Rangers defend and attack, territorial control isn't always the most important thing to Clement. He wants players who can take advantage of big spaces, which I think is why you've seen the likes of Dujon Sterling and Ridvan Yilmaz and even Chefty coming off the bench in midweek. Alongside Cherney, they're players who can progress the ball individually and make use of the space that is kind of synonymous with the football that Clement wants to play. That's a little bit of a side note. If we look at the build-up to Rangers' first goal of the day, it starts with James Tavernier and wide on the right as the right fullback, kind of providing width as Rangers are building play as he gets a ball from John Souttar. He goes inside, and you can see where Cherney is in this position. He's narrow, he's in the half space, not really being picked up by anyone at the moment, but in that position where he'll score the goal from, and in that position where he's just played that pass to Scott Wright from. As play materialises, the ball's worked to the left and worked back to the right. And this frame is taken just maybe 5-10 seconds later. You can now see that James Tavernier is in the centre. Now, that's probably not what you want and where you want him all the time. He's not a fullback who's going to take the ball off the centre-backs and kind of play on the half-turn. But it is important for what comes next, because now Cherney's on the outside. He's moved out quickly to that side as opposed to always starting there. We've seen him in the half space, but now he's out wide. And look where James Tavernier is. He's running now free. And again, I think this is the important point to stress when you're talking about the variation that maybe this can give Rangers on the right-hand side. Much like Cherney is free to make that pass for a few seconds, much like Cherney is free to go and get on the ball and score the goal, as we will see in a minute. It's this variation that Rangers probably haven't had when they've been playing two right footers on that side. And also just the basic fact of having a right footer and a left footer. Cherney gets on the ball here, and as Motherwell tried to press the ball out to the sideline, it allows him to kind of play against that press, doesn't it? Gets the ball to James Tavernier in this position, it allows Rangers to access the final third. I also just think it's an important point to, if we look at the goal, instead of, this is maybe something that, again, we're going to see develop throughout the season, how Rangers create space against a low block. So it's definitely we've spoken about it for years, but definitely something that last season there was room to improve on. I thought it was interesting in this situation that Tom Lawrence, instead of trying to cross to the back post, just waited his time, played the ball back to Conor Barron, who played the ball out to Ridvan Yilmaz. And although it's a really small distance, if you look at this frame here, compared to this frame a couple of seconds later, the Motherwell defence is just squeezed up slightly. You're talking about a few yards, but their body positions maybe changed a little bit. They're not as set. They're a little bit more set here when Lawrence has the ball initially, compared to in a couple of seconds when Ridvan Yilmaz has the ball on his right foot to defend that cross, and that ultimately allows Diomande to get up and then Cyril Dessers to go and score the opening goal of the game. You can see in the pass network, which is charting the games where players made their average passes, made their passes from on an average basis. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. This kind of 4-1-4-1 structure, a lot of the ball was held by the defence. The bigger the circle, the more the number of passes that the certain Rangers players had. You can see that Cherney and Scott Wright are a little bit more narrow. And again, I think that's important compared to the fullbacks, because Clement wants to play with wingers, but I think he wants to play with someone like Abdallah Sima, who's not Cherney's more of a touchline hugger than Abdallah Sima. But again, he maybe wants to start out wide, but he doesn't want to stay out wide. He wants to get into the box. His goal scoring numbers were really impressive for FC20. And I think that pass network is probably pretty reflective of what Clement wants in possession. It's more of a number 6 and 2 number 8s as opposed to kind of a 2-1 in midfield with an out-and-out number 10 with Tom Lawrence towards the left-hand side. Just going to look at the goal that Rangers scored and conceded to kind of close this video. The goal that Rangers scored, I thought, was a good example, and Cherney himself spoke about this in his press conference, again, of them playing football at a tempo that allowed them to break through a defence. So often, I think, watching Rangers in the last few seasons, especially domestically, it feels like they go around teams too often. It feels like it's in comfortable areas. And Stephen Naismith actually said this last week, didn't he, when Rangers played Hearts? He said that, okay, they had 60% of the ball, but a lot of it was in front of us, and a lot of it was in areas where we were comfortable to allow them to have that possession of the ball. What Rangers did in the build-up to this goal was they moved the ball at a pace that meant James Tavernier got ahead of his man Wilson. And that's important. Wilson's attracted to the ball. Suter plays it to Tavernier. Tavernier's ahead of Wilson, because that then means that a midfielder, there's a knock-on effect down the line. So Andy Halliday has to come out of his position, which means that Diomande is free, which means that Dan Casey has to step out of the Motherwell defence. And all of that combines to basically form this gap to allow Václav Černý to run into. Now, I think he would have made that movement if the centre-back was there or not. But again, I thought it was just a good example of Rangers moving the ball at a better pace than we're maybe accustomed to seeing them do so. That creates the gaps that they're able to exploit quickly. And Černý, he doesn't really dally on the ball. He knows what he's going to do. Again, much like midweek away in Lublin, yes, he might not be fully sharp, but this is a round peg and a round hole. This is a player doing what they've done 100 times, receiving the ball on that left foot, cutting inside and hitting a really good shot. And you can just see here in the reverse frame the difference between this clip and the next one. Dan Casey moving out of the defence to try and track Diomande. Again, because Halliday's had to move wide, because there's been this breakdown in communication from Motherwell from a defensive point of view, but that is all catalysed by Rangers moving the ball quickly in the build-up. Something that I think we've seen them struggle with a lot under Clement. They've been too direct, trying to attack quickly and then lacking control. This was a good example of when they do build play quickly, getting the space into Černý, and then Černý, again, he's comfortable in these big areas. He's comfortable as an individual to go and take that effort on individually, and obviously scored a fantastic goal into the corner. Just to finish, why do Rangers look like they can be passed through so easily? Here is my brief tuppence worth on that. I think it comes down to a few things. A breakdown in communication between what the press is doing in the front section and the defensive section. I think an element of complacency by James Tavernier with not closing down the cross. Also an expectation that he thinks his two centre-backs will be able to clear the ball. An element of bad luck. All coincided for what was a really weak goal defensively to concede. You can see here, this is just before the long ball goes up from a Motherwell point of view from their goalkeeper. Dessers is pressing the goalkeeper into a long ball. Rangers are locked on man for man. There's no short passing option, and they know they're forcing the long ball. Now, it's actually a really good pass from the Motherwell goalkeeper, which picks out his free man in one action. Again, in this frame, you can see as the ball falls to the Motherwell's midfielder that Rangers, in their midfield and their attack, are locked on man for man. I think Ridvan Yilmaz is actually pushed up and Connor Barron is covering him. For me, the first issue here is the fact that you don't have one of your centre-backs step up, because you can see here that Rangers are on a 4v4. And I think what's happened is the front half of the team is locked on and went kind of man for man and pressed up aggressively. But the back end of the team hasn't. And that's left this big space between the midfield and the attack. Now, Interestingly, when Clement was asked about it in his press conference after, he chose to not talk about this detail. I don't know, but I don't think as a manager he's too fussed about conceding territory in this way. I don't think he sees conceding counterattacks as the worst thing in the world. You get some managers who really, really care about territory, and he is. We've heard players speak about this last season, Colin Goldson and John Souttar in particular, wanting to keep teams penned back in to their defensive third. So maybe he's just trying to protect his team a bit. But for me, this whole goal is negated if you have a centre-back who's ready and able to step up, leave the defence 3-for-3 at the back and stop this move at source. But okay, maybe that doesn't happen, and maybe Clement wants to keep this +1 against the defender, against the Motherwell attacker, to give you a little bit more security. And it's just a little bit of a breakdown in communication. From here, I do think there is a lot of issues as well. This is the frame just before the goal. You can see James Tavernier, whether he's just trying to delay to allow Diamandi to get back into track as man, maybe whether he thinks it's so far away and he's got two centre-backs behind him. I think regardless, if you're more aggressive and you stop that cross, this goal doesn't happen, because from this position, Rangers shouldn't concede. They've got two centre-backs. Both of them get touching the ball, which leads the ball to go into the goal. And there is an element of misfortune about it. But for me, the issue is, to go back to it, you don't have a centre-back stepping in this situation. It's John Souttar to close down the cross. Tavernier can't, because he's got this man on the outside. And because the front part of the team has been so aggressive and the defensive team hasn't, it leads to this big gap. And just one final point on that. I thought we saw with Robin Proper throughout, one of the main reasons that Clement wanted to bring him to Ibrox, and why he might be a bit more of a stylistic fit to Clement's style of play than someone like Connor Goldson. Again, you can see here that the two midfielders, it's Barron and Diamandi, who are highlighted. I think this is after a long ball, and they go up to press the two Motherwell midfielders. What this does is it leaves this big gap in front of the defence. Now, this is something that, if you think back in particular to the new-year-old firm, Kyogo scored a goal from this gap kind of in front of the defence behind the midfield. Because of the way Clement wants to utilise his midfield with this number 10, with Tom Lawrence, who's alongside Cyril Dessers, pressing the Motherwell back three at the moment, you need, I think, centre-backs who are comfortable defending on their front foot effectively and closing this space. And this is something that I don't think this was a great strength of Goldson's game, because a lot of his best performances, maybe spare that Europa League run under Van Bronckhorst, but a lot of his best performances, if you think of Gerrard Abiel's football, you always kind of had that defensive midfielder defending in front of you, because Rangers were defending the zone rather than going man for man. A lot of Clement's defensive play is more man for man. Proper was pretty comfortable, I thought, throughout the game, and you saw this when you watched him at FC20 in the lead up to his move, going in and stopping these moves at source. Because what happens, I think, here is if you have two central defenders who aren't comfortable stepping into that space, coinciding with two midfielders who are going to be aggressive and press up man for man, is you just get strikers turning in these positions. And much like the lead up to the goal, Rangers can be played through with one pass, because they have some of the team pressing up man for man and some of the team not pressing up man for man. I think Robin Proper should help Rangers in that regard. The question is there another central defensive partner who's capable of doing that? Leon Balogun is probably the most suited to that role, to being aggressive, to go and attacking the ball. But how many games can he play this season? We shall wait and see. Anyway, this was slightly longer than expected. I hope that's given you some interesting insight from our rewatch of Rangers 2, Motherwell 1. As ever, you can subscribe to the Rangers Review. That's the best way to support the work we do to get this type of content early. At the moment, we are running a new season sale. You can get a year of the Rangers Review for just £12. The links for that will be in the description below. Until then, thank you for joining me. I'll speak to you soon, and